The other night, I was up in Columbia, our state capital, attending an event, and it was one of those events that by the time you're seated, you're sitting right close to everyone, and so I was seated next to a couple who've lived in Columbia for a long time. Kaki and Belton Ziegler are their names. And Belton's father, Nick, these folks are from the PD originally. Belton's father, Nick, was the chancellor of our diocese once upon a time. And then Belton himself was the chancellor for the upper diocese. And so he leaned over and asked me a question. He said, "Are you having a sufficiently miserable Lent?" A popular saying, he went on to describe, of one of the bishops under whom he had served in the upper diocese. So I chuckled appropriately, sort of like y'all just did. But only after a bit of reflection did it dawn on me how thoroughly smug and devoid of humor my immediate response to him was. So intent was I on putting a good face on the matter. So I'd said to him, oh, I just love Lent. With a big smile on my face. I said, it's such a wonderful time to be given the opportunity to reflect and to be in the wilderness with Jesus. It can be a time of real creativity. That's what I've always found. Yes, that's what I said. Ugh. While that may well be true, and it is, that is precisely how I have always viewed Lent, in part. The Chancellor was reflecting a much deeper truth, which is this: purges are painful. Purges are painful, aren't they? Painful and necessary. We know this. The Ten Commandments allow us to come face to face with ourselves in very specific ways. Very specific. For example, you have heard me say before that I really like donkeys. I really love donkeys. So, thou shalt not covet another's donkey. It gets me every single time. Purges are painful. That's what is happening with Jesus overturning the tables in the temple. The place was to have been this ordered house of the Lord, and it had become cluttered up. And so Lent is a time when we are cast into the wilderness with Jesus, and yes, it can be a wonderfully creative time, a time of personal reflection and learning, a time of reordering, a time of new beginnings, a time of decision. It's often been in my own life a time where when big decisions have become clearer to me. But such refreshment and rejuvenation often do not take place without a purge of some sorts. And sometimes such a purge is quite practical. Recently, my study at home had become a bit cluttered. Then I realized that things had begun to spill over into the next room, which is my little sitting area and place where I like to read. And now maybe none of you can relate or even know what I'm talking about with regard to this sort of thing ever happening. So beginning in January, because I didn't get to it in Advent, which would have been the proper time to do it, beginning in January, I began to tackle matters rather ruthlessly. A purge of sorts. Draining, you better believe it, but absolutely necessary and vital in all manner of ways. And what I found is that as soon as I began to get a handle on things and my home returned to being that peaceful haven once again, I found that I began to write a few prayers for a few things. That's something kind of new. There is a direct correlation between purges and fresh endeavors. You know this, don't you? Think about your own life. What have purges looked like? And then what does your life look like after the purge? That's what the question, are you having a sufficiently miserable Lent, is really all about. In a world in which we are inundated with seemingly every event everywhere in the whole world, at every time, Lent invites us to clear out the clutter and quietly reflect. The Reverend Dr. Roy Hills is with us today. Be sure that you see his stunning exhibit of crosses in Walton Hall. Thank you, Roy. He had a wonderful adult class today. Lent is about making our own journey with Jesus to the cross. What does your Lenten journey look like? If you find yourself sufficiently miserable from time to time along the way, don't worry. It is Lent, after all, a time for purging, a time for catharsis, a time for growth. Amen.